Well, good morning. I'm a latecomer to the party. I've been for about 5-10 years reading all the work that you guys have done, and so I'm really, frankly, very surprised and honored to be able to see in the flesh all these people. John Geisker's here, and Anthony Lasguardo and Eli Ungar-Sargon are here. All these people I've been reading about and listening to hour after hour. So thank you for letting me join the party. Anthony, I've been cheering from the sidelines, and I don't want to continue to be from the sidelines. My title is actually not from Mark Twain. It's a title given by Benjamin Disraeli. It reflects my peak at seeing for the 500th time the lousy research done in Africa on HIV, having it referred to as a 60% reduction in HIV, 60 or 65%. We're talking about a 1.3% reduction, which I will see if I can show you. That's the size of it. If that. And the data are based upon some crappy logic and crappy methodology. But this, and this is similar to the, you've heard the tenfold reduction in urinary tract infections if you're circumcised. Tenfold! That's amazing. We're talking about less than 1% difference. But any freshman in college will tell you that if you take statistics, you're never supposed to take a percentage of a percentage. That's a no-no. And that's what you get. Read any of these books, and they'll tell you how to do it wrong. Well, that's what we're seeing in print. And the press picks it up, and the journal articles all pick up these 65% and then tenfold reduction. It's ridiculous. Classic misuse of statistics. Now, you all know the sad history of circumcision. And this is just an alphabetical listing of the various justifications that have been used for it, starting with acne and going down to wet dreams. And it includes saliva, criminal behavior, hives, homosexuality, unhappiness, spinal curvature, and so on. Ridiculous. Now, no, yeah. Now, when I was a young father, I was confronted with a lot of baby books. Benjamin Spock was the most significant of them. Benjamin Spock, by the way, this book has sold far more than the Bible. It was in every American's home in the 50s and 60s and 70s. And Ben Spock said, I think circumcision's a good idea, especially if most of the boys in the neighborhood are circumcised, then a boy feels regular. Here we are in the land of the free and the home of the brave, and parents are told to cut off part of their baby's body for no reason other than other people do it. That's sad. Now, you probably know all this. These are some of the baby books that also made the same point again and again and again. They were full of evidence, all of them citing this laundry list of benefits that circumcision would provide, but for which the evidence just wasn't there. The evidence was there, you had to root for it, but the evidence was there on its harms and its risks, but those were never mentioned in the baby books. Now, you know all this stuff, but the public doesn't, and most American physicians do not. Now, since childhood, we've all been told to respect the authority of doctors, right? Doctors know what they're doing, have a great deal of respect for doctors, and ever since childhood, we've been told that we have to take the opinions of physicians as gospel, because after all, they are eminent and they are scientifically trained and so on. Well, let's tackle this. You may be feeling cowed if you want to talk to your neighbor and your neighbor says, well, who should I believe? Whom should I believe? You or all these eminent scientifically trained physicians, right? So let's tackle the problem. First, there are a lot of excellent reasons for opposing circumcision, as you know, that have nothing to do with scientific research. For example, you may know that every male is born with a foreskin, every female is born with, every mammal is born with a foreskin. Nature does not make mistakes like this and perpetuate them for 200 years in every single mammalian species if it is a mistake. And that's a good reason for opposing the practice, even if you don't want to consider the scientific research. Or you may know that babies are strapped down, scream in pain, out of sight and out of earshot of the parents, and their foreskin is ripped off, it's then crushed and it's cut, and babies have injured their diaphragms, have ripped their lungs, have ruptured their stomachs, have gone into coma-like states as they scream in their agony when this is done. So we don't know the long-term consequences of that torture, but empathy for victims' suffering is a perfectly good reason for opposing circumcision, again, over and above the scientific research. Or you may be convinced that the rights of any child to his or her own body parts forbid someone from mutilating them unless there is compelling evidence of harm. And that's an ethical position I find very hard to argue with. Or you may realize that this is a billion-dollar industry in this country. It's easy money, that some American physicians make a very nice living doing nothing but botched circumcisions, revisions, or treating the meatal stenosis of circumcised boys. There's even an attorney who makes a nice living out of dealing with things like that. And many, many private swimming pools, many new cars, and children's college tuitions have been paid for by circumcision. Some people say that every baby is born with a $400 coupon that needs simply to be clipped for the physician to enjoy it. So all of these things are good reasons to avoid circumcision. And you may or may not be concerned by the scientific evidence, but for those who are, I want to address why circumcision research is so controversial, how to handle the question of how we can possibly refute the many doctors who promote it, those who are assumed to be pillars of medical institutions and scientific respectability. Just so you know, my own background is in scientific research and statistics and research methodology. And let's face it, and I admit it, I'm a nerd. So I will try not to bore you with nerdy stuff. I taught psychology and research methodology and statistics at Vassar College for many years. My children were born when I was at institutions with good scientific and medical libraries. So being a nerd, that's why I could discover how little evidence there was to justify circumcision many years ago. Just for background, what is a PhD and how... Whoops. Oh, there you go. And how does it differ from an MD? Well, a PhD is a doctor of philosophy. And natural philosophy, put that in quotes, natural philosophy is what they called science back then. Now, the goal is to discover the truth about the natural world. Sometimes the title was given honorifically, as in Benjamin Franklin, who is called Dr. Franklin because of his excellent work in electricity. A doctor means a scholar qualified to teach. An MD obviously means a medical practitioner. The goal is to treat patients and try to make them healthier. When Isaac Newton and Galileo and Ben Franklin were doing scientific research, the local medical practitioner was often a barber. Those without any degrees at that time adopted the prestige of the term for learned scholars, doctor. That's where it came from. So as a young professor, I taught hundreds of pre-med students. Some of them were interested in science and research methodology. Some of them were not. Knowledge of research methodology is desirable, but at bottom, it's not really required to treat patients. And the public may think of medical doctors as scientists, and some do go on to get a PhD, and we call them doctor, but most are not. And the key point is that most medical doctors are not scientists, and they may not have any appreciation of what science truly is and what it is not. Now, that's not a bad thing. I'm going to argue that if you are in an accident and you get hurt, don't call for a scientist, right? I mean, you arrive on the gurney, you don't want some scientist saying, ooh, what a great opportunity to do an experiment. No. You want somebody to treat you. You want them to do the best they can to make you healthy fast. That's what you should be doing. Now, most doctors work hard and are busy people, and while some may have time to keep up with the literature, most of them are doing what they were told is the right thing to do long ago. And what they learned long ago in medical school about circumcision was outdated and wrong. Often it's the same fallacious nonsense you could have seen in the parent books I showed you from the 40s and 50s and 60s. Medical textbooks in this country often depict normal male genitalia as circumcised. This is kind of the same point that David made with the Vitruvian man. The foreskin has magically disappeared. Physicians don't even get to know what it looks like. The usual potpourri of circumcision's supposed but debunked benefits are all cited, and this recitation of benefit after benefit after benefit, Anthony calls it the argumentation by a kitchen sink. And he's absolutely right. If you just throw enough out there, some of it has to stick. And if the foreskin is taught at all, it's the pathologies that are taught, it's the problems that are taught, but not the benefits. So if the physicians are themselves circumcised, or they're circumcising families in an overwhelmingly circumcised culture, and if they have imbibed the American Kool-Aid of supposed benefits and believe the procedure to be risk-free, and if they were exposed to little or none of the scientific literature, how reliable is their expertise going to be? And to put a finer point on it, why would you expect them to know anything more about this than your next-door neighbor? Because often they don't. How many MDs have read of the work of Dr. Robert Van Houw, or Dr. Morton Frisch, or Dr. Brian Earp, or many of the people in this room? Virtually none of them have. But you'd like to think that if they have performed hundreds of foreskin amputations on agonized, screaming children, that before they urge parents to do this, they would have at least understood and explained the lack of any justification. You'd like to think that. But at any rate, don't assume physicians know as much as you do on this subject. Now, why is the research so controversial? Well, scientists argue a lot over facts. Like attorneys cross-examining a witness. Only the most robust evidence is ever going to be accepted. And there are a lot of challenges. Challenges in research. I make a big distinction between physics and chemistry, which is rather simple in terms of its methodology and concerns, versus biology versus psychology. Here, biology is dealing with organisms. They're not all the same. And so to do research in biology, you need a sample of animals or plants or whatever it is, because each of them is a little bit different. That's not the case with physics and chemistry. A cubic centimeter of aluminum is a cubic centimeter of aluminum. And if you want to look at the melting point, you don't need to take a sample of different aluminum samples. You have one and that's enough, or cobalt or anything else. Whereas in biology, organisms will differ, and their behavior may be a function of being observed by you. In psychology, it's even more complicated because you now have sentient persons as your subjects of your research. So it gets complicated. So I'll be very brief, but there are lots of different reasons why. One of them is internal validity, and there are lots of types of internal validity. There's getting a representative sample. That's very hard to do. Researcher bias. I'm told there are 6,000 studies done by American researchers trying to find the benefits of circumcision. How many of those 6,000 studies have been done by unbiased researchers? Respondent biases. This is a huge difference. When you do research on prejudice, you don't ask people, are you prejudiced? They have a certain bias in answering it. And you're probably familiar with a huge body of research from Psych 101 showing how much we all try to avoid confronting uncomfortable truths. Cognitive dissonance is what's often called. But comforting lies are much, much more appealing than unpleasant truths. And so people are apt to say, gee, there's nothing wrong with my penis. My parents love me. I'm sure that my parents did what was best for me. So we find that boys who are cut are much more supportive of circumcision than intact boys, and girls who are cut are much more supportive of female circumcision than intact girls. And there are others. In fact, there's a whole potpourri of different things, and I don't want to belabor this point because it's kind of nerdy, but bottom line is research is kind of a minefield, and to get a research paper published, you have to be very careful to avoid stepping on any of these challenges to internal validity. But there's an even bigger issue that's often ignored in circumcision research, and that's external validity. Now, let me explain. Suppose you are seeking a drug to cure cancer. And so you are a really meticulous researcher. You get the cleanest Petri dishes. You get your lab rats from Charles River. You get the approved cell lines. You adhere to the strictest methodology, and you are, appropriate blinding. You have brand new microscopes. You do everything right. You dot the I's, cross the T's. Congratulations, you've done great work. Now, does your drug work on human beings in the real world? And if it doesn't, too bad. All of the work you've done to date doesn't count because it doesn't work in the real world. Well, here in the United States, we have a wonderful, unique opportunity. We've had 100 years of circumcising American boys, which the rest of the world, especially Europe, didn't do. The great majority of American boys are circumcised. The great majority, like 95% of European boys, are not. So it's a great natural little experiment to find out what the effect has been. 100 years of all those benefits that were cited, well, we now know what the results are. What do we find? After 100 years, are Americans happier sexually? No. How about HPV, human papillomavirus? No. Syphilis? No. Gonorrhea, other sexually transmitted infections? No, no. Cancer in men? No. Cancer in women? No. HIV? No. In fact, with something like 80 to 85% circumcised adult men, we in the U.S. are the worst in the developed world. Take a look at the data. And it's maybe too small to see, but here's the U.S. There's circumcision rate. U.S. is up here. This is AIDS prevalence. U.S. is up there. Versus Australia and Canada, who dropped circumcising more recently. And then here are these countries that dropped it in the 40s or never adopted it at all. UK, France, Denmark, Germany, Sweden, Norway, Finland, Japan, and we could go on. Does this show that circumcision is an effective way to reduce AIDS? Just the opposite. Can you imagine how the Africans are going to feel when they discover that America is pushing circumcision on them as an HIV preventative? They're going to see, is this evidence? I don't think so. So why do we claim all these benefits? But as I say, research is an extremely difficult process, and it's hard to do it right. Let me give you an example of something that I did personally, and these are the things they're all lies. I did something, I was the chief research officer at a company that conducted the National Health and Wellness Survey. This is a 25-year-old process of gathering hundreds and hundreds of thousands of surveys from people where they spill out their entire medical history. Takes about an hour. They're paid to do this. It's a representative sample. I have to say it is the gold standard in this kind of research. Hundreds and hundreds of medical publications are based upon it. And so I once published something showing the concordance of a whole bunch of different phenomena together that is called metabolic syndrome, hyperlipidemia and hypertension and prediabetes and obesity and so on. So it's a good way to do that because you can find that out. We did 40,000 plus surveys in the U.S. back when I was director of this in 2004. We did 37,000 in Europe, across the big 5 countries in Europe. I won't go into it too deeply, but the survey was translated in the local language. It was back translated. The survey the sample was stratified, and then it was weighted and balanced. It's covered all the health conditions. The question we ask that's relevant now is the question we ask of men. In the past 6 months, have you had difficulty achieving or maintaining an erection? And they told us whether they did or did not. Now, bottom line is, gold standard of respected research, very large samples, and I'll show you what the results are. Well, that's not very surprising. The older you are, the more likely you're to complain of ED. Big deal. My client was the head of ED research at Pfizer. That's what he wanted me to do. He didn't ask me to do this, but I did it. I separated the data by US versus Europe. Wow, big difference. In fact, and this is my recollection, I don't have the data, I just did it. But if you look here, a 20-year-old American is complaining of ED at the same level as a 40-year-old European. A 50-year-old American is complaining of ED at the same level as a 70-year-old European. Well, I can't say that circumcision is the cause, and that's the problem. We didn't ask the question in the survey. But this is definitely the case for the US versus Europe. And by the way, it wasn't just my data. I've just recently seen other data which confirms the same thing. In other studies, ED prevalence in the U.S. is 22% and 10% in Spain. So although we didn't ask the circumcision question in the survey back then, and they still don't, it is not due to differential candor. One could hypothesize that maybe Americans are so high because we're more candid about our infirmities. Well, no. I analyzed the data to see whether things like fecal or urinary incontinence was differentially reported. No. There's no evidence of differential candor. So that isn't it. But the problem is that there are other comorbidities that are confounding things. Comorbidities are the things that are accompanied by or that you occur with ED. And those are things like hyperlipidemia or hypertension or smoking or obesity, a bunch of things. So what I've been trying to do is to get them to give me or sell me the data after having statistically removed the confounding effects of those comorbidities. But haven't done it yet, and they don't seem to want to deal with me because I'm not a $50,000 client for them. But don't dismiss, by the way, the loss of 20 years of sexual intimacy. It may be, okay, who cares about randy old men? No, I think sexual intimacy is a terribly important part of a relationship between a loving couple. And if that is destroyed, that really strikes at the heart of a lot of what keeps the glue that keeps couples together. So it's not a trivial thing, I think. Okay. I think, though, there's hope for American medicine. The old paradigm for medicine was that the doctor knows best, right? Don't question the doctor. He or she knows what they're doing. But their expertise is based on their own experiences, their impressions, their assumptions, what the drug rep tells them, their readings, their recollections from medical school training, their family history, their religious background, popular media, blah, blah, blah. All that is combined in some mysterious way into what they think they're doing. But there is hope for America because there is a new kid in town, a new future for medicine, and it's called evidence-based medicine. Evidence-based medicine. In my naivete, I thought that medicine already was evidence-based, but it's not. Science is evidence-based. Can you imagine evidence-based science, non-evidence-based science? But medicine isn't. So the future paradigm may be that physicians need to bring evidence into the research evidence has to be weighed into their clinical expertise. You'd like to think this is going to happen. I'm not sure it will, but I certainly have hope. Now, psychology identifies two phenomena that I want to talk about that need to be overcome before we can convert Americans. The first one, of course, is cognitive dissonance, which you talked about before. Nobody wants to be told that they or their sons and brothers have suffered harm caused by their parents. No one wants to believe that their parents made a mistake. And doctors who may have caused harm for 20 or 30 years have even more resistance to acknowledging their mistakes. Think about it. I mean, if you have strapped down hundreds of infants who are screaming and writhing in pain, you have to believe that what you're doing is something good for them. Incredibly, physicians will also tell you, and they did this for many, many years, babies feel no pain. I remember reading it in all those books for when I was a young parent. Babies feel no pain. Look at that. Do those babies, are they in pain? Of course they're in pain. Their screaming is so different from normal whimpering if they're hungry or need their diaper changed. Yeah, it seems to me it's monstrous that anybody could claim that babies feel no pain. But it seems to me this is an obscene lie and that it's just an indication of how powerful the need to justify ourselves is. There is a second problem at work here, a Psych 101 problem. It's called the familiarity effect or the mere exposure. This is a little bit of research in Psychology 101, but a guy named Robert Zients discovered that there was a preference for familiarity. He would show people pictures of faces. And over the course of a research project, you might see one face 10 times, another face 8 times, another face 6 times, and randomly you'd see a lot of different faces. Turns out that the attractiveness of the person was linearly a function of how many times you expose them to it. Do this with sequences of notes. How much do you like this sequence of notes versus that sequence of notes? Well, it depends upon how many times you had played it to them. The more often, the more they liked it. You see Chinese characters, and a different Chinese character every time. You think, well, actually, they're not quite different. The same ones are being shown at different frequencies. The more you see that Chinese character, even though you don't know what it means, the more favorable you think it means if you had to guess the meaning. So it's a very, very important basic phenomenon. I'll tell you a little personal anecdote to explain why. I grew up in a small town in upstate New York. It was not an ethnically diverse town. Almost everybody was from Northern Europe. And when I was 5 or 6 years old, or 7, I remember looking in the encyclopedia, and I saw a picture called maybe The Faces of Man or something, and they had a picture of one person from each of all the countries. So there was a person from Turkey, a person from Peru, an Indian from Peru, an Australian Aboriginal, someone from India, a Chinaman, someone from Kenya, Peru, Eskimos, Pygmies, everybody, all kinds of people. And I made a wonderful discovery. It just tickled me. The most attractive people, they looked like all my neighbors in my family. What a lucky experience. The good-looking ones look like me. How about that? And another little personal anecdote. I grew up in a family with all boys, no girls. I didn't play with girls much. They had no need to. And finally, when I was about 12 years old, I think, I finally got myself into the library and looked at an anatomy textbook, and I saw what a woman looks like. And I was astonished. I had no idea. I had absolutely no idea what that was all about. And I would think any girl who got that to that age and had never seen what a naked male looks like would come to the same conclusion. Oh my God. Well, after a while, you get relaxed about that, and you're not upset, and that's good. That's normal. I think there may be something uniquely disturbing about body surprises. I think we all know when you see someone on the street who has part of a nose removed or part of an ear removed or their jawbone has been taken out or something, you kind of look at them with a kind of a morbid curiosity. But in any case, the reaction on seeing something for the first time is often surprise or disgust. Boys with girls, girls with boys, and cut boys who see intact boys think, ooh, what's that? And conversely, intact boys who see a circumcised penis, they say, ooh, what happened to you? You're mutilated, you're scarred, whatever. That's normal for people to have that reaction. But what is not normal is to talk about it, is to express your feelings about the other people. You're not supposed to say how you feel. The sad fact is that intact boys in this culture are made to feel shamed, and circumcised boys may be made to feel shamed in other cultures. I think we're going to have a talk on that subject tomorrow. Henny Lightfoot Klein says, intact women in Africa are told that their genitals are disgusting, that no man would touch them. Their genitals are dirty, their labia are ugly, smelly, dangerous, and so on. This is what women are taught in Africa. Sound familiar? Here in the USA, we have movies like Bad Moms, TV shows like Seinfeld and Sex and the City. And can I have that movie clip? Now, this is a comedian. I just play it down the bottom. Yeah.
I don't know what it is about an English, Irish, or Australian accent that makes me just want to get undressed and high-five myself. That's how it was with my boyfriend. The first 2 months, we got along great because I couldn't understand a word he said. After 2 years, I'm like, stop talking like that, okay? Talk like me, just try. You dirty, uncircumcised freak. I don't know why they don't just circumcise guys in other countries. They're all gonna end up in our country anyway, okay? Did you hear the new phenomenon that's going on about uncircumcised parents, that they're letting their children decide, the boys decide if they want to get circumcised? It's like, okay, it shouldn't be up to the boy. It should be up to the girl. The one that's going to be him
enough.
In 15 years. Okay.
Okay. You can go back to the slides. Well, to me, this is offensive. Do we find it funny to make fun of girls' genitalia? Is it acceptable to make fun of other people's skin or their hair or their nose or their lips? Is this acceptable in our culture to humiliate people this way? And the problem is this isn't just offensive and rude, but here in this century, American boys may feel they have to undergo amputation of healthy tissue in order to be socially acceptable. And healthy American girls may need to feel they have to undergo comparable labiaplasty by plastic surgeons in order to be sexually acceptable. 170,000 girls annually, young ladies, go into the plastic surgeon to have their labia removed or shrunk. and the advertisement promises that they will be returned to looking like they were 15 years old. So, okay, well, let's finish up. We read that a majority of men and women have a preference for circumcised penises in this country. That's just unfamiliarity. Most of the world has a preference for intact. Millions of male and female Africans have a preference for circumcised women. Do those preferences deserve respect? The answer to hurtful comments is not to hurt others. It's to stop hate speech. So I hope that we can do that. Okay.